Buddy, let's see if you can hear me over here. Good evening, everybody. I want to thank. Okay, this might be better. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to come out tonight and joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time and hopefully get the right message. When putting the program together, and the way it was worked out, for those who missed last week, Bezrat Hashem, the video will be available after the entire series is over. But last week we discussed being attunement, pure attunement into your child. And that attunement will help one see different signs that there may be different causes and different reactions as far as what the child might be going through, and how to really tune into their feelings and their needs before we get into a crisis situation. But unfortunately, sometimes we may miss the signs. Sometimes we're not so attuned as to what is going on really behind the scenes. And many different things then happen to this child where they begin to crave outside sources, meaning outside the family, and they get hooked. And it's a problem. And we could all understand that. The question is, how do we help get these kids, again, or a family member, whether it's your child, whether it's a neighbor's child, family member's child. These children are walking around with so much pain inside of them that they're trying to find something to hold on to and fill a void that was created. Yesterday, we read in the Parsha, as Rabbi Akiva calls it, Zekla Gadol B'Torah, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You have to love your neighbor, your person that you're in charge of, as if you would love yourself. But really, what does that mean? So one way to look at it is here in Eretz Yisrael, and this looks inspired everywhere else, we say it pretty much every single day. It says, when we talk about L'man achai v'ra'ai, adaber nashalom bach. We say this every day. What is this v'ra'ai? What is it? What are we talking about? So I was looking into it a little bit, and I see two psukim beforehand. It's talking about Atzikra Banayach Elabona. We're talking about our children. Our children shouldn't just be called children. They are our cornerstones, the foundation of our future. So when you go ahead and you see your neighbor, you see your friend, what Chazal is telling us is that when you see your friend, you see your neighbor, and you ask them and you say hello, you're supposed to inquire more so into their world. Understand what's going on specifically with their children. Is everything okay? Are things working for you? And when things are not, the person that you're asking can feel to the point where they have somebody they can talk to. And that, when that happens, you're able to now help your neighbor, your friend, your chaver, someone with their feelings and their children. And then the next pasuk is saying about L'man beis Hashem Elokeinu Alav Tova, that Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Himself will reward you by asking you how you're doing and looking into your life and helping you where you need that help. So V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, it's not just about love, because we have to love ourselves, no question about it. But to what point? To the point where we want others to inquire about our lives and our feelings and our thoughts, to the point where we can get the help and we have somebody we can talk to. And I have no other person here in Eretz Yisrael, in many places, and in a way we go back many, many, many years. Though we never crossed paths back in Yeshiva Shal Yoshev. Well, it's still our alma mater, and it's a place where everybody there considers themselves family. And I learned a lot by being in Shal Yoshev about how the Rabbanim and the Rebbeim go ahead and inquired on each and every individual student that came through that place. So I'd like to introduce Ariel Fisher, who will give you some words of wisdom. Thank you.
First of all, it's very humbling to be here. One of the things from speaking a little bit with Rabbi Yaakov about the organization, about the organization, is really a thought that I had. Yaakov Avinu tells his children, the Ikvus of the Mashiach, how we're going to be able to relate in the time of Bikesh Legalis Saketz to reveal when Mashiach's going to come. And he says, Hey, Asu v'agida lachem, come together. V'agida lachem, come together. And the Sfarim HaKadoshim, the Holy Sfarim, tell us that part of what Yaakov Avinu was saying was we got to get together. We have to join together. And that is part of the journey of the Kates, of the Geula, of bringing the Geula. Not so different than in Mitzrayim, when it's brought down that the Jews used to get together before Paro said that you have to work harder and work harder. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu was mevakesh that they would get together once a week and pour out their hearts and share their pain and share with one another what they're going through. And as long as they were doing that, they were able to deal with the struggles that they were going through. And it's no different, the Geula of Mitzrayim, the Geula, the time of Mashiach, the Ikvus of the Mashiach for sure, where we're holding, where we are now, is definitely the same lesson. And to speak to Rabbi Yaakov and to hear just a little bit, and now that I'm here tonight, and just seeing the hard work and the vision and the amount of people, I say this all the time, it goes well with in general when people struggle, and my own experience is that everyone, thinks I'm the only one who's struggling. I deal with teenagers, I deal with boys from yeshiva, I deal with a lot, which I'll talk about in a second. And I tell this to my guys, I tell them the same exact thing. It doesn't change, at least my experience with myself. It hasn't changed in my life yet, at my age, when I do the same thing, when I'm struggling with what I'm struggling with and I'm anxious about what I'm anxious about. And just the fact that I have a listening ear, a listening heart, or even just someone else who shares that burden. What's the quote that I love, I hope I'll say it properly, is better to walk with a friend in the dark than to be alone in the light. And it's one of my favorite. It actually hit me very strong when I saw that quote, because obviously we want to be in the light together, but it's not always like that. And when we're together in darkness, so to speak, and we feel the pain that we feel and we go through whatever we go through, just to have someone who is going through it with us. It doesn't necessarily have to be your spouse. Obviously, your spouse, we'll talk about that a little bit. It's obviously important to have that, but just to look at a room and to speak to, Rabbi Yaakov and his wife, who are so invested to further more awareness, is a chizuk, is a tremendous strength. It also says, in the times of Mashiach, it says, Ish l're'eu, right? We say it in the Haftorah, it's in the Navin says, Ish l're'eu yazoru l'chiv yomer chazak. Is that's what we're supposed to do at the end of time. There's so much confusion. There's so many challenges that not only us as adults, more adults, but the generation, the 70-year-old, whatever age. I deal with 17 and up, 18 and up, more or less. But the amount of need and the amount of I just met, 3 therapists just in the span of 10 minutes. I'm so excited. I get so excited because I have all the, I have a lot of, they call it koach adam, manpower meaning there are a lot of guys out there. There are a lot of girls out there. There are a lot of us our brothers and sisters, our children, not just our children as our children, but there's so much need, and Baruch Hashem, there's so much koach. There's so much that is here. There's so much that I've found and find more and more. Just being here tonight, I never heard of this organization, and I'm so excited that there's so much, and they're doing. One of the parents who I know over here told me, yeah, they're involved in this, and the organization helped them out so much. It's like, so Hashem should give, Rabbi Yaakov, you and your wife and all of us should give you all the resources you need. I don't know about, I run the yeshiva, so I know what that means, resources. It's a non-profit organization. I'm not asking anyone for money yet, but that's what we do. That's what we do, and it's hard, but at the same time, it's exciting. And the reason it's exciting is because when you're focused on your mission, and you're focused on that child and that person, who you could try and help. I don't know if we can help. You could try and help. Then I'll ask anybody for the chutzpah that I have to sit sometimes across from a financially wealthy person. All I need to do is have one conversation with one of my students or someone like that, like 5 minutes before, and I'll ask the guy for all the money in the world, because I don't have to tell anybody here. It's helping. I don't even look at it saving one. I don't even look at it like that. Helping another yid, making it more comfortable for another Jew is the most beautiful thing, as the Nefesh Chaim writes. Kach hoya avi omer tamid. Reb Chaim Volozhin, for all the people who learn Torah and they steig away. Reb Chaim Volozhin said in his Hakdam, the introduction to the Nefesh Chaim, not a Hasidic sefer, the opposite of a Hasidic sefer. And what did he say? The Kach hoya omer avi tamid. What would my father always tell me? Loi la'atzmai nevra'anam. A person's not created for himself. We're put in this world to help other people. So Hashem should help you, Rabbi Yaakov, and your wife, and all of us. We should be zocher to help each other, help whoever we gotta help. That's ish l're'eu yazoru l'chiv yomer chazak, and through that we'll be zocher to heal and heal ourselves as well, which we're going to talk about, and help others and overflow our healing into others. Amen. Okay. I wrote down a few thoughts. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not used to a mic so much. Okay, I'll figure it out. I like to move around. That's my problem. I feel a little bit. That's one of the lines. One of my guys in yeshiva said this. This is for you, doctor, because I spread this all over the place. One of the students in my yeshiva, it is better, yeah. Now I'm feeling more comfortable. This is why. Not that I was ever diagnosed with ADHD. I don't think I had that, but it doesn't matter even if I did. Why? Because one of the students in my yeshiva said that they diagnosed me with ADHD, and he says, not ADHD. He says it's called AAEIC. I said, and he said this to me. I said, what's AAEIC? He says it's called Above Average Energy, Imagination, and Creativity. Yeah, I'm going to clap for that one. A guy in the yeshiva, no, I added, this is for the, I'll say it again. I told him I'm going to chazer, and I said I'm spreading it to the world. That's what I told him. So this was a couple months ago. Again, it's so true, right? ADHD, and I added something, so I said, so all the doctors who are doing research, I added in because it's above AAEIC, above average energy, imagination, I say, and some doctors hold it's also the I also stands for intelligence. I made it like a lumdish thing, so it makes it more, it sounds more professional. Imagination, intelligence, and creativity. Well, I was just saying that for my own, just jumping around a little bit over here, but the reason I'm saying that is because that's part of it. Part of it is us tapping in just to hear you talking about the children and what we can invest in our children. Oh. You got the right person. I could talk hours about this. I'm just going to briefly try to be brief because it's going to be hard for me because I'm getting excited when I start talking about our children and it's emotional also for me, I realize, because I'm always dealing with them. So for me to take a step back and to get the support as well, I need that as well. So it gets emotional for me that I'm able to share. So thank you on a personal level. Just in brief, I don't know how many people know Baruch Hashem, Yeshiva, and Moshe Montessori. I'll just say brief how I got into. I am going to focus a little bit on the addiction just because that's what I was told that we're going to talk about, but we'll expand that a little bit. How I got connected to addiction, knowing a little bit about it. My yeshiva is not a yeshiva for addicts, even though I like the word addict in Hebrew much better, because the word is machur, and we all have parts of us, no IFS pun intended in that, but it could be it works with IFS as well. We all have parts of us that are machur. We all have parts of us that are sold to things that we wish we can not do. So, and it's hard for us. So my yeshiva Baruch Shem, we have Kanai Nahara, close to 200 Bachrim, and most of them have AAEIC. Most of them are above average energy, imagination, parentheses, intelligence, and creativity. I say that because I like to know it even better. And what I've experienced over the last few years, probably the last 5 years, the yeshiva is only 7 years old. I'm still learning a lot, and I hope I always will be learning more, so I can help more and be more honest with myself and honest with the Bachrim and honest with everything I'm doing. But my experience came just slowly. I'll say this quickly. How I got into it is a guy is saying there's a difference between a guy who you could put your arm around and send him to a therapist and send him this and give him a little chizik, and then he's going through a stage and he gets over his alcohol or his drinking, his smoking. I don't mean smoking cigarettes. They don't call it that anymore. Marijuana. Now, unfortunately, ketamine is very popular, very, very popular, very scary. Ketamine is very popular. It's a horse tranquilizer. That's become very popular. And obviously, unfortunately, the internet is terrible. In many ways, terrible. A lot of guys suffer. There's a lot of sexual confusion and things that are going on. It's not just my yeshiva. It's everywhere. I have Bachrim from the mirror who come to me, any therapist here, anyone who's exposed to anyone in the Hamon Am, in most people, it's not, Baruch Hashem, I'm blessed, and I feel blessed that we just talk about it and we try and open it up and try and deal with it. So, long story short, I had to send 2 guys actually in Beit Shemesh as a detox. I sent guys detox. 2 of my guys who were I actually hired someone from Returno, which is a rehab center here, and he helped me sort of be their drug counselor, ... Anyway, what happened at the end was it worked. I was able to provide something for them. They went to this detox. Then I had 5 guys there. Then I had 10 guys there. I'm like, holy cow, what's going on here? So I got a staff together. Anyway, and we started a rehab in the old city, which Bli Ayin Hara. I'm still learning. I'm so happy that I met you, Dr. Kaur. I'm happy that I met you because it's very important to meet more and more people who are involved specifically in addictions because I'm learning more. There's the 12 steps. There's this one holds this. There's a lot to learn, and I'm learning on the job. Baruch Hashem, we've had at least 30, I don't know the exact number, 30, 40 guys who've been through this. I have guys who are already coming back to yeshiva. That's a whole nother conversation. But that's where I got more exposed to addiction in the guys. I don't myself personally, I'm not so connected to addiction myself. Like I more outsource it and talk to people and learn about it. Because like everything, you have AA, you have NA, you have many different chilukei deis, as we say in yeshiva, machlokusim, and good. And I don't like machlokus in a negative way, but it's good to have different opinions because that way, we try and use as many resources that we can. And that's only a year and a half, almost 2 years old. So we're very much, and I'm actually in the middle right now of we have another 2-3 guys who are going through it. We have graduates already, and I'm really revamping. We might move the location because we're in the old city. So the old city is incredible. They go to the Koso, they go to the Kotel Friday night. There is a Ruchnis element, but I'm looking to relocate. I looked at some places actually in Beit Shemesh because I want to give them that different look, but whatever. Anyway, that's my connection where I've gotten closer and understanding and learning about addiction. Here we go. Let me just do my really what I want to. It's hard. I do much better at question answer. I'm not going to do that obviously because of time, and I like talking more and answering and back and forth. I don't really like preaching and saying, but I just thought today of just some thoughts to share with everybody from my experience, and I really mean this in as much sincere as I want to be very sincere in what I'm saying, and that is that I'm not telling anyone what to do. I'm just sharing with you my experience dealing with parents, dealing with parents who've gone through and go through the process of either having a child, we'll call it an addict, or someone who's close to an addict, or whatever it is, a difficult situation. And I'm just going to share some thoughts that I've had and my experience that I've seen has helped. I broke it down to about 6 things. My last thing is like a final icing on the cake, I'll call it. But they're all, I think, just want to share. I guess it's not a forum to any questions. I'm just going to go, right? Yeah, we'll keep it like that. Okay. So my number one thing that I wrote, and this I think is very, and again, all parenting, we'll start with that. Parenting in general is the most difficult thing in the world. To be a good parent, to be a parent, to have good relationships. Right? I said to my guys, that's right, I talk about the whole thing, Sfiras Omer. There's no other period in time that the Jewish people have the longest period in time, including Elul, including Tishrei, where you're working on yourself as much as you do during this time, and you need those. There's an Indian every day, every night. I was thinking, it's not a time for now, the shiur of tonight, that it's Teferes Shebenetzach, and tonight, right, is Netzach Shebenetzach. I had a thought about that. I'm not going to share them now, but it's deep. In the midas that we work on, to work on your midas, to have great relationships, it's all about working on yourself. It's all about, understanding yourself. As Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, you can live 70, 80 years and not even know yourself. That's what Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said 200 years ago. You can live 70, 80 years and not even get to know yourself. And that's without what we have to distract us. So to be a parent in general is difficult because you have to know yourself. You have to have, as my mother always said, and it's so true in my relationship with my wife, the best thing you can do for your children is have a great relationship with your spouse. And that's hard, and it takes work, and it takes listening, and it takes your own healing, and your spouse's healing, and healing together, which we'll talk about. So number one, the first thing is is that, and this I try and always remember with my own children, and specifically when it comes to addictions, children who are really struggling, is that it doesn't have to make sense. A lot of times we blame our spouse, a lot of times we blame ourselves, a lot of times we blame the father-in-law, the mother-in-law, we blame the sister-in-law, the cousin, or the aunt, whoever the family member is. And you have to remember, it's not your fault. It's a neshama thing. Your child is a neshama that Hashem chose to bring this neshama and put this neshama into your home. And it's not your fault if your child is struggling with this, and it's definitely not your spouse's fault. That's even worse. To blame, to place blame. And the fault, instead of having a fault, I would say forgive, and that's obviously a high level. Don't fault yourself, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself, which is very hard. That's a high level. To go from faulting myself to forgiving myself, but that's where you want to get to. You want to forgive yourself and say, it's okay, this is what Hashem put in place. And if I did everything perfectly, I would still have the same child. I would still have the same child. So I think that that's number one lesson, I think, that I see is that the blame, a person can sit there just blaming and blaming. I should have done this. She should have done this. The brother, the sister, the school, the Rebbe, blah, blah. It's here. It's here. It's here. That's number one. Number two, and this also is a little bit hard, is you know, your son or your daughter has bechira. Again, we're not talking about a 10-year-old kid or an 8-year-old kid. That's a little bit harder. Which they also have bechira. They have the choice. It's their decision to become healthy. It's their decision to live a great life. It's really their decision. And we just need to be supportive. I think sometimes we get a little bit controlling, which makes sense. It's my child. It's my daughter. It's my son. And really to sort of separate yourself and sort of say, okay, my child, to encourage, to guide, to be there, but to sort of try as much as you can to separate your life and your decisions. You could decide to help yourself, which we're going to talk about. I think that's a couple afterwards, a few of my notes afterwards. Focus on yourself. It's not a contradiction to focus on your child, but to realize my child has bechira. My child needs to learn, just like we have bechira. We have choices that we make that sometimes we don't make good choices. But I think sometimes, especially when it comes to addictions, there's like, and I get this a lot. Sometimes I have a parent who I could tell they're too controlling. And I had one of my recovering addicts who was helping me. He was a sponsor. And he said this kid's problem is his father is too controlling to make him clean. You know, he needs to take a step back. And I think that sometimes that happens. That's number two. Number three is, and this is a little bit what I was saying earlier, it's a long journey. It's a long journey. Raising children, I, Baruch Shem, have my 3 older children, Baruch Shem, are married, and you never stop being a parent worrying about your children. And it's a long journey, and my advice is listen to people, learn about it, learn about being a parent, learn about addiction, learn about what it is. Don't sort of try and take a step back a little bit and learn from other people. Read books. Try not to be sheetadic, like have a very clear, 12 steps works for some people. Some people will say, what, he said it only works for some people. Some people swear by the 12 steps, and anyone who says otherwise is, whatever it is. For some people, I've seen the 12 steps turns them off. For some people, they need the 12 steps. And it's hard. It's a hard balance. In my situation, it is challenging for me a little bit. Because some say the only way you'll be healthy is if you follow the 12 steps. And there's some people who have a pushback. But you got to learn. You got to keep yourself open to hear different opinions, and it takes time. A month might work. 6 months might work. People relapse. It's hard. It's very challenging. That's number 3. So number 3 is it's a long journey. It takes time, patience, learn, speak to different people. Speak to people. Number 4, and this I think is probably, I'll put this together with 4 and 5. I had this recently where, I'll move this along a little bit, where a parent told me after their child got married, he was by me for 4 years. He went through a lot. And the parents came to me afterwards after he was all good and he went through his stuff. And the parents were like, okay, we're a wreck. You're good now. My son is good. My daughter's good, but I'm a wreck. This journey, I think in trauma they say that also. They say sometimes the observer of the trauma, even though it's traumatic to be a parent of a kid who's going through, a child who's going through any difficulty, it's traumatic. But sometimes even being an observer of the trauma could be even more traumatic than the actual person who's in the trauma. So here you're a parent and it's like 5 years of ups and downs, and your son and your daughter, oh, they made it through, but then you're a wreck, and your marriage is a wreck, and your emotional stuff is a wreck, and all that. So my 4th and 5th thing really is, well, my 4th thing is focus and make sure you're taking care of yourself. I can't say that enough. You gotta take care of yourself, and that's not being selfish. The greatest thing that you could do for your child in general, the greatest thing you could do for your child in general, the greatest thing you could do for your spouse, the greatest thing you could do for any relationship is take care of yourself, and that's not selfish. I always say that's one of my favorite words. When I forgot who pointed it out to me, it's not selfish, it's self-care. And then you'll overflow. You'll be a better mother. You'll be a better father. And even if your child is going through whatever they're going through, when they see daddy's taking care of himself, mommy's taking care of herself. And really, that's the greatest thing that somebody can do, is to really focus on yourself. And I know sometimes it's very difficult because this is really the second thing. The second thing is to focus on other relationships, focus on other children as well. Sometimes that one child can suck out all of your energy and take out everything, and then your whole world is just, occupied with this one child, and you're not able to think about your life. You're not able to think about other things going on. Rabbi Twersky once said a beautiful example, and he said that he once got a bracha from someone in Yerushalayim, and he says, can I have a bracha from an Alti Yerushalmi? And he says, yeah, what's the bracha? He says, you should have a lot of daigas. He says, a bracha? I should have a lot of worries? How is that a bracha? So Rabbi Twersky said, when a person has a real heavy problem, he doesn't have a lot of daigas. She doesn't have a lot of daigas. They're hyper-focused on that one thing. When you're living a regular life and everything's regular, so you have this, and I had a tough morning and a tough afternoon, and things sort of have a regular, annoying, flow to them. But when you have that one child, you hyper-focus on that one child, whoever it might be, and that's like, oh, my life is terrible. That's not true. Rabbi Greenwald, I don't know if you've, Ronnie Greenwald is a legend. I was zocher to be very close with him. Rabbi Greenwald told me, it says any professional who's a therapist or a rebbe or deals with difficult situations, and I'm going to say this to parents as well, to all of us. He says you have to twice a year, you got to go to the mirror and see the base medrash and see how many people are steiging. You have to go to places where people are, because what happens is we think that every person walking around is the manifestation of this trauma and terrible, and you get consumed. A person can get consumed. It's so important. It's so important to take time for yourself, to try and take time for your other children. So important not to get sucked into that. And it's not a contradiction to helping out your child. Adarabba. The stronger you are, the healthier you are. When you're at peace with yourself, if you got to do yoga, do yoga. If you have to meditate, meditate, because that conversation with that child will be a much better conversation. Your conversation with your spouse will be a much stronger, better, empathic, beautiful conversation that you'll be able to work together. But if you're all over the place and you're not clear on things, that's very challenging, very, very challenging. And I'll end off with these last two things. This I think we all know, but I'm going to add a little twist over here. And that's Emunah. Emunah. Daven to Hashem. I don't have to tell everybody that. Emunah, Emunah, Emunascha Balelis. The greatest Emunah means that it's not clear. And here I'm going to add this, and this to me is probably the most powerful thing I could say. Emunah, what Tzaddik says, is an incredible thing, and I would never be able to say it, but with Tzaddik HaKohen, Tzaddik said it, so I'm just repeating what he says, and I'm going to bring it to us a little bit. I'm in conclusion. I'm looking at the clock, so. What Tzaddik says, Kishem, just like a person has to have emunah in Hashem, so too he or she has to have emunah in themselves. He says, just like you work on your emunah with Hashem, so too you have to have emunah in yourself. And I'm going to add one little knick, and I think that Tzaddik would be okay with this. Because it's the same thing. Just like you have to have emunah in Hashem, you have to have emunah in your child. And emunah in your child means balenus. My daughter, since I was almost 3 children, Baruch Hashem, 3 boys. My second child has some young cutie pie, he's 2 years old, and he has some developmental situations and challenges, and it's scary, you know, she's young and she has kind of home, and it's been very hard for her, very hard for all of us in a certain way, because, you know, we're not sure what's going to be, etc., blah, blah. And we were talking one Friday night, she comes over a lot, she lives in Givat Zev, about 15, 20 minutes from the Moshav, and we were talking, and I said to her, and we've been emotional with this, I said to her, and she was struggling with, like, this is my son, like, what's going on, like, Baruch Hashem, we'll see, Baruch Hashem, everything, whatever will be. But I said, Chana, her name's Chana, I said, Chana, we have to be, his name's Yaakov, his biggest advocate, his cheerleader. That emunah, I had a boy in yeshiva who was born deaf. And the mother gets the credit for me telling this to my daughter. And he told me, I remember him telling me, and this guy spoke, and he played ball, and he was just like everybody else. And he said, my mother refused to accept that I am different than anyone. Now, I'm not talking about denial. I'm not saying you got to get your child what they need. It's not about being in denial. But to be the biggest cheerleader, that goes for the men. We have men cheerleaders too, as well. To be the biggest, I'm your biggest fan. I'm your biggest believer. As they say, Yosef HaTzadik and Yaakov Avinu. They say, Yosef HaTzadik, Vayei Amen. They say that Yosef HaTzadik had the power to fight off his taivas, because the Gemara says, Yod Yuknei Shalaviv. He saw his father, and everybody learns. This is how we learned back in the day, old school maybe. We learned that what? Oh, Musar, Gid, Gehenna. That's not the, maybe that's one shot. That's the shot we grew up. I wish they told me this a long time ago. They say, no. Vayimayim. Vayimayim is the same Vayimayim that Yaakov Avinu said when they told Yosef he's dead. He says, I don't believe it. I refuse to believe that he's dead. I know Yosef's going to make it. I know Yosef's going to make it. Through hell. Through Mitzrayim. Through Tumah. Through darkness. And I, Tati, know my son that he's going to make it, even though it's hard for me to accept that. And that's what gave Yosef the ability to be strong. Knowing that Mommy, Tati, yeah, I'm a crazy kid and I don't know what's going on. I don't mean it like that, but you know what I mean. Yeah, I mean, it's good, blah, 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 blah. and what's going on, and this, it's like sugar, what's going on. But Papi and Mommy are there for me in the deepest, deepest, deepest way, and they're there for me whether I'm Shabbos, not Shabbos, kosher, not kosher, earrings, no earrings, purple hair, craziness, drugs, alcohol, a nut, embarrasses me in public. I love you. It's hard for me. That's why I go to therapy. You can tell your son that also. I go to therapy. I wouldn't say because of you. You go to therapy because we all need to go to therapy. I go to therapy. I'm proud to say that I go to therapy. I'm proud to say that. It's an honor to say that I struggle, and I still struggle. I need to talk. I need to talk to people. I get chizuk when I talk to people, and I unload my stuff. So you're telling me an 18-year-old kid, a 16-year-old kid in our generation doesn't have stuff going on? You're telling me we don't all need, we for sure need. Not in a bad way. It's not old anymore where people say, oh, there's something wrong with you. There is. We all got stuff. And I'll end off, and this is a biggie. I'm ending off with this one. This is a biggie when it comes to Yiddishkeit, because I know a lot of parents struggle with the Yiddishkeit piece. I get that a lot, and I hear that. But what's going to be with Yiddishkeit? What's going to be with Hashem? What's going to be with Hashem? What's going to be with Yiddishkeit? It's a great question. And someone sent me this quote recently. It's one of my favorites, and I wrote it down here. Don't push Hashem into your children's hearts. Don't push Hashem into your children's hearts. Bring them into your heart. And if Hashem is in your heart, your child will find Hashem there. I'm going to say it one more time. So I think that's the bottom line. Don't push Hashem. Don't worry. Don't worry. And I can just tell you all, I'm serious. I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen a 70-year-old guy who's an addict, and he this, and he took off his yarmulke, and he pierced his ears, and he's the lowest of the low, quote unquote. And 5 years later, I'm telling you, just let him be. He'll come back. I promise you, he'll come back. I promise you. I promise you. If your heart is open to him, he'll find Hashem in your heart that's open to him. Hashem should help us all. Hashem be zocha. Thank you. It's an honor to stand here and to speak and to be with everybody here. Hashem should, Bezos Hashem will give everybody the siyata d'shmaya to be able to be just amazing for our children, because that's all we want. That's all we want. We just want to be great parents. We just want our children to have a great life. And Hashem should help us all, should give us siyata d'shmaya to see that. I have the blessing to tell parents when they're going through such pain, because I've seen this, Baruch Hashem, when you stand in the chuppah with your son, because it happens. I do it all the time. And the father's crying, the mother's crying, and we just look at each other. It's hard. I can't cry. I'm usually there inside a condition. It's hard. It is. I got to hold it in. But I'm like, this is absolutely, I would say shechianu. The Sfardim say shechianu by the chasana. I'll ask a Shiloh if I could say shechianu, because those weddings, when I'm standing there, it happens. I went in for 15 weddings. I got another 6 weddings. And it's the most beautiful thing. So Mitzvah Hashem will all be zocha to stand at your children's weddings, marrying Erecha, beautiful, wonderful spouses, and going in the derech of Yiddishkeit and sweetness and love. And Mitzvah Hashem, we should be zocha all of us to a geula shlema. Thank you.
Just to go back a little bit, when I was talking about Fisher, I'm out of back in Russia. So for the couple of years that I was there, I was zocha to be there with Shlomo Hazan. The last year or so of his life, where he was very ill, the last year or so in his life when he was very ill and he wasn't able to get out much, a bunch of us used to go to his house which wasn't so far from mine. We used to go to his house for Shalosh Shuras on Shabbos. And when we get there in Baruch Hashem, we were able to hear a lot of words and wisdom. But one time I got there a little early, where I was one of the first people in the room. And the Rav calls me over. Now, I don't know how many of you got the finger, this finger, the one calling you over. As a 20-year-old yeshiva bacher, getting called over by your Rosh Yeshiva is not necessarily a great feeling. A little scary, to be honest. And you're wondering, how did he know? What's going to happen with me? So he calls me over, and I went over. Of course, he can't run away. And he cups my hand. And he looks at me, and a tear formed in his eye. And he says to me, "You'll do better tomorrow." That was his mussar. And that's the mussar we have to remember to give our children. But also, it's the role of a therapist and someone who cares deeply about their clients, deeply about the situation, that helps those, especially in the addiction, helps those get to that tomorrow so they can do better. Dr. Ariel is one of those, where he turns and he's worked so many years and so hard to get to where he is with the Israel Center of Addiction, helping make system changes, helping addicts get to a better tomorrow. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ariel Kaur and thank him for joining us.
Thank you for the introduction, Rabbi. Thank you for your introduction. If you don't mind, I'm going to be sitting. First, I'd like to apologize for my accent. I grew up in Singapore. I went to a British international school with people from over 140 countries. So it's kind of a confused accent. And you know what they say about people who speak multiple languages? If they don't speak any language, well, and I have a living example of that. Now, what I would like to ask you, if you'd like to do this interactively, or would like me to just speak? I mean, I'll start off with a minute, but you have to make a decision. If I really launch into a lecture, I'll lecture. If you'd like to do this interactively, and that's your decision. Okay, so let me start for a few minutes, and then we'll just put your hand up, and I'd love to answer whatever I can. So one of the challenges in this type of setups is, hi Michelle. Sure, good to see you. One of the challenges that we have in this type of setting is that we're down to maybe 1 hour. So many of the things I'm going to say are somewhat reductionist, and they're not perhaps as nuanced as they should be, because addiction, as any other mental health disorder, is a very nuanced problem. So let's start. What is addiction? Well, it really depends on who you ask. I'd like to dispel a few notions, some that we've heard tonight. We're not all addicts, and we don't have parts of us that suffer from addiction. The word addiction comes from the word adicere, which in Latin means to be enslaved. Only approximately 10% of the adult population suffers from addiction. That's it. Even for a very... No, and I'll tell you why I'm saying this, because most people who try drugs, even hard drugs, even amphetamines, even heroin, don't become addicted at all. Which means that we really have to try to understand, one, what addiction is, and who are those people who do become addicts. Now, I also have a problem with using the word addicts. Whenever we look at people who suffer from addiction, we don't call them the depressed. And people who suffer from trauma, we don't call them the traumatized. Yet with addiction, we do call them addicts. And part of it, I think, is generated by a very deeply entrenched stigma about who these people are. I would like to call them people who suffer from addiction. And I don't like the word machur, I like the word of somebody who's suffering from addiction, just like we do with any other disorder. So how does the medical world treat addiction? Addiction, by the World Health Organization, is really a brain disorder. Now, what does a brain disorder mean? It means that it causes very acute neurobiological changes. What is the problem with that? Is that almost all other mental health disorders cause acute mental health changes in the brain. Now I'm going to start perhaps with the concept of bechira, because this was raised there. I'm not the best in Shalmala in any way, but the first question that I'm always asked is whether people suffer from addiction have bechira or not. Complex question, because we're all born with bechira, and the Rambam says that we're always left with bechira unless you're a shaitan. And I've never really met somebody who suffers, let's say, from a heroin addiction who would likely inject himself in front of a policeman. Does that mean that there's no bechira? So what I would like to suggest is that bechira is compromised more and more acutely over time. I think most people suffer from addiction, start with some form of free will, and that becomes more and more now as time goes by, until I really believe that the only choice that they have is whether they're up to go for treatment or not. Now, we see that with brain imaging today. The brain is a very complex system. I did my postdoctoral studies in neuroscience, and I'm always amazed at how little we know about the brain, even though we've spent so much money and time trying to understand it. There are two main systems in the brain. One is called the limbic system. The center of it is the amygdala. The limbic system is where it processes reward and emotions, fear, for example, and joy and happiness. That's what I would call the gas. If you want to compare it to a car, that's the gas system that we have. The other system is the orbitofrontal cortex, which is really here. That's the executive functioning of our brain. That's the rational system, the system that is meant to tell you, well, don't drink anything tonight because you have to show up for work tomorrow. Okay? Or you better not go out tonight to go gamble because your mortgage is due tomorrow. Now what happens in the brain of people who suffer from addiction is that the limbic system very much takes over the brain. Now it doesn't mean that the orbitofrontal cortices don't work at all, but the functioning is impaired. And something is very significantly impaired. Now, almost all people that suffer from addiction started their behavior during their adolescent years. Doesn't mean that they became addicts in their adolescent years, but they started their behavior. Free will, or choice, if you want, in adolescent years is a murky concept as it is. Why? Because most of our systems are not yet fully formed. So think about what happens to an adolescent, as it is where choice is a compromised system, and then starts engaging in a behavior which compromises that free will system even more. And that's what we see. This, can you hear me now? Okay. So we call it a brain disorder, and what we see, for example, after treatment, typically between 2 and 3 years, we do see that the brain starts changing. People engage in treatment and actually stick to that treatment, we do see that the free will system, the executive functioning, starts becoming more and more functional. Now, what happens when you call something a brain disease? Well, it really depends on what you ask. One could argue that when you call something a brain disease, you dehumanize the person. It's as if saying that that person doesn't have a functioning brain. Perhaps we should lock him up, or perhaps we should marginalize him. Now, what happens in mental health, I always say that mental health is kind of the stepsister of health, and addiction is the lost cousin. Which is why people often call addiction, they don't assume that it's part of mental health. But part of the things that we have to do here is normalize addiction and make sure people understand it is a mental health disorder in every other way. There are two types of addiction. Yeah. One is to substances, drugs, alcohol, prescription medication, and the other is to behaviors. There are only 3 behaviors that are considered bona fide addiction in the World Health Organization that calls an addiction is gambling, problematic sexual behavior, pornography is one of them, and gaming. Now, there's already a whole line of other behaviors that could be a matter of time before we consider addiction. Gaming, video gaming. Yes, that's a recognized, formally recognized addiction. People play video games. Have you heard of a game called Fortnite? There are many Candy Crush, there are many games that one can play over computers, and many of them are highly addictive. So it's not yet considered an addiction by the World Health Organization. I think it's a matter of time. How much do you know about psychiatric diagnosis? So psychiatric diagnosis is a very problematic area. Why? Because unlike any other thing in health, there's no blood work that you can do. Okay, there's no genetic profiling that you can do. So really it's all arbitrary diagnosis, right? You have to create arbitrary criteria, and then say whether a person is suffering from the disorder or not. I'll give you one of the biggest problems that we have in psychiatry, just to express that. How do you differentiate between somebody suffering from depression or grief? Grief is a normative behavior. One of your immediate family members, God forbid, passes away. You're expected to feel grief. If you don't, one could argue that there's something wrong. Except the criteria for grief and for depression is identical. And then how do you start remarking what's normative grief and when does depression start? So that's one of the biggest problems that we have in psychiatry. That you use arbitrary scales. The spectrum of use in general is what we call recreational social use. An adolescent goes out and does enjoy with his friends and not in any way condoning that behavior, but that's recreational use. It could then become problematic use, where it starts impairing your functioning, but you're still functional. Okay? Addiction is always the third and fourth standard deviation, meaning when there is a serious damage that is inflicted on your life. Which is why we can't say that we all suffer from addiction, because the people who suffer from addiction are in a terrible state. It's a very, very... Not yet. There's a lot of controversy in the world of science. The way the diagnosis is derived is by having ample, many, many years of science behind it. So obesity, the first two longitudinal studies, developmental studies on obesity just came out. They do show that the brain of somebody who suffers from obesity is almost identical to the brain of somebody who suffers from cocaine addiction. Okay, you see dopamine receptors, if you know what that is, just the studies appearing from the cells. But it will take some time until we're able to formally recognize it. It's a matter of time. Yes, please. That's a very good question. So let's look at the diagnosis for addiction. Addiction, the behaviors have to be there for at least 6 months. Okay? It's a behavior that you want to stop and you can't. It's a behavior that causes damage over the long term, whether socially or professionally or intimately. It can be something else. And what do I mean by something else? For example, if somebody who suffers from bipolar disorder, in the manic episode of bipolar, it can very much mimic somebody who's suffering from addiction. A person who suffers from bipolar in a manic episode can spend days without sleep at a casino gambling, except they don't suffer from addiction. They suffer from bipolar. Do we all understand the difference? So differential diagnosis is very important here. There is a subjective kind of element which there has to be subjective distress. A person suffering from addiction has to feel distress. They may not know what it's about, but they have to feel that. And if they don't, it's questionable whether they suffer from addiction or there may be other problems at play here. Typically, the frequency increases over time. It doesn't have to, but typically it does. And the intensity of it has to increase over time. Those are really the main, I would say, criteria for addiction. You don't have to fit all of them in order to meet criteria, but some of them have to be present. Obsessions and compulsion. So yes, most people suffer from addiction, suffer from obsessions and from compulsions. Do we all know the difference between the two? No. Yes? Obsession is when you continually think certain thoughts about ideas, about things that you want to do, and it doesn't leave you alone. Compulsions is when you have certain behaviors or acts that basically you don't have control over impulses. Okay, you're in the middle of work, you have a deadline, and you run out to buy a lottery ticket, even though you're meant to submit a very important project at work. Then the next question may be, well, how is addiction different to obsessive compulsive disorder? So that's a good question. Okay? It will look very much the same, right? If I'm saying a person suffering from addiction, suffers from obsessions and from compulsions, and how is it different? For two reasons. In addiction, there is always an element of pleasure. Always. It may be there for just 1 second. And typically at the beginning of a behavior, and it lasts for much longer, the pleasure element. In OCD, in obsessive compulsive disorder, There's no element of pleasure whatsoever. All it is tension relief. Okay, people who engage in OCD behaviors, all they do is try to basically reduce the anxiety. Okay, so that's one major difference. The other major difference is from a neurobiological perspective, it's a completely different mechanism of the brain. Okay, it doesn't work on the same circuits as addiction. The third reason, of course, is because the addiction treatment, the addiction modalities, don't work on OCD. Does that answer the question? Okay. So I could leave you there and just tell you that addiction is a brain disorder. But there is a problem, because if you look at human history, it doesn't quite lend itself to it. Anyway. So I'll start with a few anecdotes that perhaps will show that the story is a little more nuanced than that. A scientist by the name of Bruce Alexander in the 1970s started doing a lot of research with rats. And he decided to also treat some of these rats with drugs because he wanted to see how they reacted. And he put rats inside cages and he filled the water filters with cocaine. He doesn't give them cocaine-laced water. What he noticed is that those rats hit the pedal to drink hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times until they just basically fall over and die. Okay? So he did that again and again and again and again. But then as he was continuing with his research, he said to himself, well, really, that's not how rats live. Rats live in communities. So why don't I build a rat park? He built this huge park for rats. He put these water filters, okay, cocaine-laced water filter, and he puts dozens and dozens of rats together. And he did all these games for them, and tunnels and carousels, etc. And what he noticed was a fascinating thing. Only 5% of the rats continue to go back to the cocaine-laced water. Only 5%. Even 100% of them, when they were alone, used that cocaine-laced water. Then he said, well, I'm going to check that and took it even a step further. He put rats inside individual cages, gave them cocaine-laced water, gave them all use it, kept them stepping the pedal, then took them out and put them into the rat park. 95% of those rats stopped using the cocaine-laced water. What does that suggest? There's something about the attachment system, about the bonding system, about the connection, and the social connection that those rats had was a protective factor against addiction, against compulsive use. Now we know that. I can't take no one-to-one and tell you that that's how humans, except at the exact same time, there was a human experiment that was doing the exact same thing. And that's called the Vietnam War. If you think about what happened in the Vietnam War, there were tens and tens and tens of thousands of American soldiers in Vietnam. They were frustrated. They were very dissatisfied. They were very angry with the American government. The vast majority had no idea what they were doing there. And there were poppies everywhere. Poppy is the flower that we produce heroin from. All they had to do was literally scoop it and then start smoking. That's it. And they were witnessing traumas every day. Explosion, people trying to kill them. So a very large number of those soldiers became addicts. And they would meet criteria to go for addiction. I remember there was a Senate committee that went to Vietnam during the war and said that there was a much greater danger of becoming an addict in Vietnam than there was to die in the war. And then the war ended. Now what you would expect to happen is that tens and tens of thousands of veterans return to the U.S. and continue to live as addicts. But 95% of them didn't. Only 5% of them continued to use. Only 5%. The vast majority went back to their families, to their wives, to their parents, to their kids, to their siblings, and went back immediately into normative life. So what does that suggest? Is addiction situational? Is addiction a brain disease? The vast majority of these people didn't go through any treatment whatsoever. So that raises then the question is that what does a brain disease mean? Okay, you're all with me? And now I'm going to go back to those 10% of people who are the vulnerable group for addiction. I'm going back to say that 90% of the people who use substances or engage in gambling or watching pornography or video gaming do not become addicts. So here was 10%. Now, for quite a number of years, there was a whole school of thought that said that there must be a genetic component here. So I would like to say something about genetics. Genetics is somewhat of a fluid terminology. You do know that To this day, there's not even an agreement on how many genes we have in our body. And the estimates go anywhere from 26,000 to 340,000. So we can't even agree on the number of genes that we have. Now, we know that any human behavior is an interaction of dozens and dozens of genes together. So even if we're able to identify a certain allele that is implicated, let's say, in alcoholism, okay, for that to manifest itself in human behavior, it has to be an interaction of all those genes, and it's very hard to show that. So is there a genetic component in addiction? Possible. But we do have studies today of tens and tens of thousands of identical twins. Identical twins have the exact same gene profile, identical. They were separated at birth, and they were tracked throughout their life. One of them became an addict, and the other one didn't. Okay? So that shows you that genetics is never heavily decreed anyway, but it's what we call a switch. But for that switch to be turned on, something in the environment that has to happen. The biggest thing in the environment that happens to people who suffer from addiction is childhood trauma. Now, when I say childhood trauma, I mean sexual or physical abuse. Okay, now, I would just like to distinguish there are two types of trauma. There's both the medical world calls trauma, which is anecdotal events, terrorist attacks, God forbid, sexual abuse, etc. The world of psychology has also evolved a new terminology for trauma, which we call developmental trauma. What is developmental trauma? They're not a single event. And we can't point back. We could have very many parents who had, acutely harsh education towards it, in terms of criticism, in terms of expectations, and that's what we call developmental trauma. So, children are born to the world with a certain gene profile, with a certain temperament, and they meet an environment that sometimes interacts in a way that causes a nice switch. Now, the whole interaction between the environment and genes is a whole new field in science called epigenetics. It's a field that is becoming kind of more and more interesting, and I hope that as science advances, we'll be able to have new understandings of how this interaction happens. We're starting to know more and more about genetics, and we know a lot about the environment. So about how the two interact, we know very well. Anybody hear that? Any questions so far? So let's continue. So the types of addiction we spoke about. Most addictions start as just kind of a feel good. You have an adolescent going to a party and he tries. I would like to say that I think as parents, it's very likely that we'll be able to make sure that our kids do not use substances and don't smoke. I think really the goal that we should have is try to delay the onset of that experimenting. I think if we can try to convince our adolescents that, and engaging them in discussion where we say, well, we know you're going to use at some point, people should use a huge part here, but the more we can delay the onset of it, the better it is. Does anybody know when the onset is for a child today in the secular world to view pornography? Do you know when is the onset? When is the first time exposure of a secular child today to pornography? Yeah, 8.5. So, yes. It's typically 3 months after we get their smartphone. 8.5. Now that's almost a trauma, just a built-in trauma today in the secular world. Can you imagine an 8.5-year-old watching pornography? Pornography, by the way, is really one of the greatest tidal waves that we have today. 34% of all data on the internet is pornographic. 34%. There are more users to pornographic sites than there are to Amazon, Twitter, and Netflix combined. There are more users to pornographic websites than there are to Amazon, Twitter, and Netflix combined. And unfortunately, it's also infiltrating our world. This is and some of them we have to speak more and more about. I think there's a very high level of shame and stigma to pornography, so we don't speak about it as much as we should, but it's very much present. So addiction is really, I always say it's a medication to pain. It's very effective medication. It makes pain go away, but it's very unhealthy medication. And I think that's when part of it is missing often on the street is that we have to feel a lot of compassion to people who suffer from addiction. The vast majority of them suffer from tremendous pain. Tremendous pain. And because of the entrenched stigma that it's a self-inflicted disease, but it's a self-inflicted type of behavior. After all, nobody's really born wanting to put something in their mouth or to go and drink. We have very little empathy and little understood. Okay, so the root cause of it, as we said, is really a combination of risk factors. The risk factors is actually, I'll tell you about an interesting study that was done. Probably the largest psychological study that was ever done. It's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences. They went to 27,000 Americans. It was a retrospective study, so they had to report about their childhood in hindsight. 27,000 of them, and they asked them about life experiences they had in their childhood. They died with problematic. Parents passing away, any physical abuse, sexual abuse, etc. They showed that when every single traumatic event that they had had increased the likelihood of suffering from addiction by 4 times. By 4 times. So the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is a study that was done in the United States with 27,000 American adults. It showed that for every single traumatic experience that a child experiences, there was a 4 times higher likelihood that they will suffer from addiction. Okay, so if you had 4 traumatic experiences in your childhood, you had a 16 times higher likelihood of suffering from addiction. 16 times. So addiction is, aside from all the terrible human emotional consequences, it's a devastating economic impact on the world. I don't know how much you know about what is going on in America in the last few years. The opioid epidemic in the U.S. today has cost more than 1 million lives just in the past few years at a cost of over $35 billion to the American taxpayer. So we're talking about a devastating problem that is costing not only emotionally human lives, but devastating economic impact. Israel is the fastest growing user of opiates in the world for the last 3 years running. Okay? Now we don't really have any data on overdoses. Opiates, what are opiates? Good question. Opiates are painkillers. Painkillers. Yeah, absolutely. Give it endlessly in the hospital, so it starts typically with Percocet. You don't have what could be the back operation. You have to understand, you get Percocet, the Percocet doesn't work, they upgrade it to OxyContin. Everybody knows what OxyContin is. OxyContin is a medication that was developed about 30 years ago or so. 3 brothers, psychiatrists, real geniuses. What they did is they took morphine, essentially heroin, and they put a time release mechanism in it, and they said that we should start treating it for chronic pain. Chronic pain. Morphine. Do you know that? Sorry? Absolutely it helps. I'm sorry, but it absolutely helps, except morphine is one of the most addictive substances in the world. Okay, so absolutely. So that's actually a perfect example. So she's probably in the 90%. So she's probably in the 90% and will never suffer from addiction. But what happens to those 10%? They then go into a back operation. Yeah, and then they go and buy it in the street. Or they go and they lie to their doctor and put in that they have acute pain and understand they need it. And that's when you start seeing problems. And again, Israel has the largest increase of opioid use in the world. It's a very good question. We don't have really an answer to that. Really, but the question is for every country. We're the fastest growing, the largest increase in opioid use in the world. No, we can only track legal. There's no way to track illegal use. Possibly, but that would just increase those numbers. I'm speaking about legal use, meaning prescribed opiates. I'm talking about prescribed opiates. Okay, well, go illegally, you go to a doctor, you go in the hospital, and they prescribe it. Now, what happens in Israel, we keep on saying that we don't have an opiate epidemic, and that's because we don't see any overdoses. When does it become an epidemic? Is when people start dying from it. Except in Israeli emergency rooms, when somebody shows up and basically dies from a stroke or heart attack, they don't do a toxicology report. Okay, so they have no idea whether that person died of an overdose or no. So we don't actually have any data on what's happening in terms of overdoses here at all. But I can almost guarantee that many of those deaths are overdose deaths, but we don't know. No, it's per capita. When we say fastest growing, it's always per capita. That's the only way to compare between countries. I didn't say we had an epidemic. I said we had the fastest increase in opioid use for 3 years running every single year. Okay, so that's worrying. The other thing that we have, which is really becoming an adolescent epidemic in Israel, is everybody knows what vaping is, electronic cigarettes. So that's really becoming an epidemic in Israel. The regulator fell asleep in their watch. Electronic cigarettes, especially those disposable ones, so you buy those and they can smell very nice. You can buy the marshmallow taste and chocolate or in Coca-Cola. If you compare it to a pack of cigarettes, so a box of 20 cigarettes, a pack of cigarettes, has between 200 to 300 emails. Has between 200 to 300 emails. 20 cigarettes, about 10 emails per cigarette, is between 200 to 300 emails. Electronic cigarettes has between 3,000 and 8,000 emails. Okay, 3 to 8,000 emails. Even, the vast majority has nicotine inside. They may smell good, but they have nicotine. The vast majority, 90% of them come from China, so we don't actually know what's inside. We don't. And it doesn't go through any regulatory process. And it's just marketing. It's just pure marketing. And this is when the regulator really fell asleep. This is when the Israeli government, there are already 47 countries in the world that banned them. Completely banned them. There are many countries that ban them altogether, and Israel can still buy them. And there are hundreds and hundreds of importers to this. And there's a misnomer. People think that they don't have nicotine. The vast majority of them have nicotine. Okay, so we're speaking about between 3,000 to 8,000 inhales for one single disposable cigarette. Okay? It's unbelievable. We're speaking about a real epidemic, and we're seeing that today. I speak to adolescents who tell us that they can't sit in class without vaping when the teacher turns around. They can't smell it, right? So they can just do it in class. They can hide it in the pencil box, they can do it, and then they can put it back. I don't know how much you're seeing it around here, but we're seeing it all around schools. Let's talk a little bit about treatment. So, is addiction treatable? Absolutely. Sure, absolutely. Yes. I'll say it in a different way. I'll say that there's a 10% vulnerable group in society. We don't know who they are. Okay? We don't know who they are because we just can't profile them. Absolutely. And the brain studies that we do is only after we find out that they suffer from addiction. So we don't know whether the changes that we see were implicated because they started using, okay, or they were like that to start with, or whether that was the benchmark. But we do know something fascinating. This is the brain of somebody who's gone through treatment. Okay, so neuroscientists love lights. Light means activity. Okay, so if you see a healthy person is in the left, that's the brain of a healthy person, and you can see lots of light in the middle, the yellow on the right. In the middle is a brain of a meth abuser, somebody who's addicted to meth. Okay, very hard, dangerous drug. That's after 1 month of abstinence. You can see there's much, much less activity if you compare it to a healthy person. That's considered very impaired activation. Yes, they will change the activity. Okay? But 14 months after treatment has begun, you can already see that the activation is almost back up to normal. Not quite back to normal, but that's after 14 months. So what we do now is the treatment works. The treatment in many ways starts building the circuits back to perhaps where they were before, but building things. Yes. So I'm going to say something that may sound hard, but there is no addiction in children. Okay, I'm just going to say this. Children like to experiment with many behaviors. You can perhaps see problematic use in their children, but they're not the addicts. Addiction to phone takes years. Again, I go back to what I said before, is that all people that suffer from addiction, or I mean, I say all, I mean all, started experimenting with that behavior in their adolescence. So your question is really, what do you see when you see a child or an adolescent starting to experiment with hazardous behavior? So you have to remember that the way the children look at the world is, it should really be very different from the way that we do. They find it very hard to look at long-term goals and long-term benefits versus immediate satisfaction and kind of the immediate benefits that they would get from engaging in a certain behavior. Trying to explain that to them in a cognitive cerebral way doesn't work. You know, when Nancy Reagan started the whole Just Say No program, everybody knows what Just Say No. Nancy Reagan was the first lady in the 1980s. There was a crack epidemic in the U.S. Started Just Say No, which the idea is to provide psychoeducation for children and adolescents and to show them about the terrible damage that addiction causes. And if we show that to them, then they will never use. But that was a miserable failure. Really, it was important. I think the intention was very well meaning. Yes? Yes. Yeah. If you remember those two absolutely. So you serve frying pans and, you serve fried eggs inside and says, this is your brain drug. Psychoeducation and scare tactics don't work. Just like that for smoking, all those photos of people's brains and dead fetuses and those pack of cigarettes, they don't work. So what does it? And again, it very much depends on what age we're talking about. I think love, is first and foremost. Feeling compassion. I think as parents often we're so angry when kids don't do what we want them to do and they don't behave in the way that we expect them to behave. And the more compassion you show and the more love and the more acceptance, not just like acceptance of the behavior, just acceptance of them. And I think that's really the first and foremost. Two, I think there is a way, especially with the younger children, to curate to their peer group. Okay, it's much harder with the adolescents than their children. There's definitely a good parent to curate their peer group. Peer group influence, I think, is, it creates sometimes much more damage than we think it is. We always say that everything comes from the home, but it's true, but only to an extent. Our kids spend the vast majority of the day outside the house, and it's not with us, it's with their friends. So we can't really say that everything is from the house. No. Now what do? Do you want to give me a more specific example we're talking about? Well, if we're part of that 10%, they may. I'll give an example. So I'll tell you what happened the first encounter where I've had at home with it. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I've treated over 1,000 people suffer from addiction. And then you never think it's going to come to your house, and then it does. So not addiction. My 13-and-a-half-year-old son, who goes to a very little trader in Yerushalayim, comes to me and says, Abba, my friend started smoking and I want to try it. So I have to breathe very, very deep. You're talking to a person who's never smoked a cigarette in their life. And the second, again, we spoke about the damage that smoking does. And if we decided that's what you really want, I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to stop you. But I have two requests. So he said, what are they? I was like, one day you tried it out. And he wasn't doing it because I don't know what's going to happen to you. You know, you may feel busy, you may not feel well, but you probably do it at home. And if you want to invite a friend, that's also okay. If you can't really, I'll call his parents and I'll tell you what we'll do. You can invite him here. And so we can just do it. You can do it outside on the porch and I'll just watch the door, okay? And then the second request that I have is that I buy for you. Because it's illegal and I don't want you to get in trouble, that will affect the rest of your life. So he looked at me and he was startled. He really was startled. I don't think it was the reaction that he was expecting. And a couple of days later he came back and said, I thought about it, I don't want to try it anymore. Now it doesn't always work. At all. But I'm telling you, that is it. Sorry? No. I mean, as far as I know. I mean, as far... No, but the fact that he came and told me that he wants to... Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, please. So, very interesting question. Now, the time duration actually matters a lot. It matters whether it started as 5 minutes and now it's an hour, and whether we allow it. But I would encourage you as a mother, I don't think you're going to be able to not allow him to play video games, and if he's not going to do it at home, he'll do it elsewhere. So first, it's best that he does it at home, because at least then you can see how much of his time he's spending doing it. So I think it is important to limit it and to stick to those limits. You know, the more that you create boundaries around the behavior, the more likely it is not to become reckless behavior. Okay, is it for us difficult to see how adolescents engaging in behavior that we don't look as adaptive behavior, and for that to be the fuel and the oxygen of their life? It is obviously an escape mechanism for him. Okay, but I always say that's called harm reduction, right? It's much better doing this than doing other things outside the house. So I think putting boundaries around it and sticking to them is very important. And I think one has to also encourage them to do things that are more adaptive. You know, whether it's sports or whether it's engaging with friends, etc. And actively encouraging him to do so. I think the worst thing to do is restricting him from doing it, meaning telling him you can't do it or whatsoever. Absolutely. Yes. If what I didn't hear. I always say to parents who say to me, you know, my kids are on their phone the whole time. I was like, well, first they have to start controlling their own phone use. Right? I mean, we have to mirror that behavior. So it's a futile exercise for parents to tell their children don't do something and have themselves doing it. Completely futile. It's going to fall on at all. It's really a failure from the outset. So I think first one has to work on himself in containing the behavior, and only then once you mirror it, then there is hope that the child may. By the way, it could actually be a very successful exercise if the child sees that you've overcome a behavior, and either you're engaging in a maladaptive behavior of some kind, WhatsApping in front of them or dinner time, and you work on yourself to stop it. Or you can use it as a bonding exercise where you're both trying to do it together. And that could be an opportunity to connect to each other. Yes. So in children, in the primary school children, there's no addiction at all. There's just no, the brain is just not developed. Primary school, I would say, is up to the age of perhaps 11. Okay, so there are definitely behaviors that we don't encourage. No. Again, it could be a maladaptive behavior. So necessarily healthy behavior, we want to encourage it, but you won't be suffering from addiction. It doesn't mean that you don't have to watch out, that doesn't continue, but you're not suffering from addiction. In adolescence, we can say that there's already a problematic use. Okay, why? Because it's starting to inflict damage on his life. Okay, and if it persists, And likelihood it is that when they become young adults, they'll be suffering from addiction. Yes. So, for people who suffer from addiction, it may have started as pleasure. And it could have provided a pleasure for the first hour, for the first 5 minutes, whatever it is. And when it becomes an addiction, the pleasure could be even just a second. It's always present, but it's very much minimized. And then it's just a matter of running away, escaping from pain. Okay? There's no way that a person will engage in a chronic behavior and it will just provide pleasure. Okay? Yes. So perhaps this is a good time to speak about what's available in Israel in terms of services. So give me just 3 minutes, I'll get it, I promise. Yeah? I think any behavior, again, I don't think the label addiction matters so much because an adolescent can have a problematic behavior that may manifest as a full-blown addiction later in life. But that doesn't matter because one has to deal with a problematic use in the adolescence. So I don't know that the label addiction matters so much at this point. Okay, I'll be hesitant to say that an adolescent suffers from addiction, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have some sort of an intervention. Are we clear now? I just want to answer the services. In 2015, the state of Israel basically transferred the insurance liability for mental health treatment to the Kupot. What does that mean? It was actually a very smart idea, philosophically. The idea was to have mental health treated in the community by the Kupot Cholim. That's a very nice idea. The implementation was rather disastrous. Okay, which basically amounted to the fact that today we have approximately 1 year long wait list to get an intake meeting at the Kupot. Okay? And in some of them it's much, much longer than that. I do hope that eventually they'll be able to kind of have more people working, etc. But that is correct. Mental health should be a community-based treatment. However, where is the problem then? Where is the lady asked about gaming? Where is the problem is that they carved addiction out. And addiction became the only mental health problem that was carved out of the state of Israel insurance liability, which means they're not allowed to treat it. So if Yossi goes to the Kupot and suffers from depression or from anxiety or from trauma, he'll get treatment. Again, he may have to wait for it for a long time, but he's liable for treatment or will be covered by the Kupot. But if he suffers from addiction, he cannot get that treatment. You imagine we're the only country in the Western world, okay, that has socialized medicine and carved addiction out. Why? Well, we can say also about depression, about trauma, and about anxiety, and then we can say about any mental health. I think part of that, exactly, because we don't consider addiction mental health. But it was also the case in the U.S. until the beginning of the 1990s, where the Kennedy family decided to be the crusader for it and passed in Congress an act called the Addiction Mental Health Parity Act, which was exactly to make sure that they treat addiction like all other mental health. So we're not so different. We're just lagging behind the rest of the Western world by about 40 years. So, no, in some things we're way ahead. But I do want to say something. Israel has an outstanding healthcare system. Really outstanding. For what we pay, it's unbelievable. I lived in 7 countries in my life, and when I hear people complaining about the potato, I think we should be. Absolutely. And how much? So we'll get to that. We'll put a few thoughts on that. About bonding. Okay. But mental health is unfortunately, I would say, a blemish in the Israeli healthcare system, and addiction is very much a large blemish. Yes. So what's your question? What would you do? Yeah, there's very little you can do. Most people are not minors anymore. You cannot. You can leave an open door. I must tell you that there was a kind of what we call the tough love approach that was prevalent in the world, in the Western world for decades and decades. It proved ineffective. It really proved ineffective. I think bottom line is if a person has to realize for themselves the real treatment. And I do believe that the only choice that a person suffers from real addiction is whether they're up to go to treatment or not. But they have to come to that realization themselves. And it could be through your love and it could be through your compassion, but it may take a long time until they get to that point. And you can be there to tell them that, when they want it, and you will help them. But there is very little you can do up until that point. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but yeah. You're not, no, you can't. But you can be there to talk to him, and you can be there to support him in general, you can be there to spend time with him, and you can be there without being judgmental, and you can be there with being very compassionate. But they're not always in there. They're not always. There are always the periods in between. And there may be difficult periods, but they exist. Yes. Yes. Is it so? Unlikely. So first, maybe I'll go back to the first question, but I didn't complete answer. You asked about services, and the two questions are actually unrelated. You asked about services. What we did, we have an NGO that promotes the prevention and treatment of addiction, so we advocated to the government, and after 4 years we were successful, and now the support is starting to treat addiction. Okay? No, there is. The normal addiction people works for blaming too. Okay, it typically comes later because the focus of people to drugs and alcohol are only one. So we, for example, unlikely, but a parent's love and compassion and empathy and understanding can get them into trouble. Yeah, or to get them to agree to go to treatment and really engage in it. You did ask about gaming. One of the things that parents have to do, especially with children when it comes to video games, is set clear boundaries about, times of use, durations, etc. How to do it? Absolutely, I'm saying children. With adolescents, it becomes, much more challenging. Yes. Great question. I've never met a person suffering from addiction that doesn't have a comorbid mental health disorder. Ever. Well, we don't know what the chicken and the egg, right? Because addiction could be a way to ward off anxiety. Often you see the people who start engaging in treatment for addiction, all of a sudden their anxiety just goes through the roof, or depression. We know that there's very high correlation between addiction and trauma. Very high. I mean, we know that between 50 to 80% of all people that suffer from addiction suffer from trauma. So that's ADD with a very high correlation. Those are probably the major four. Yes, but the best predictor is trauma, not ADD. And again, I've never met a person that suffers from addiction that doesn't have a comorbid mental health disorder. Ever. Yes. You're right, except the clinician that just has to lie because the primary problem is not the depression. Okay, and that doesn't make sense. It's not dignified for the person who's suffering from addiction and coming to say that he's suffering from addiction. Anyway, but the coverage is now starting. You're right, except there's no way to do that without lowering addictive symptoms. There's just no way to do that. Yes. So we think that all addictions are like that. We have a 1 in 3 pathological gamblers commit suicide. 1 in 3 pathological gamblers tries to commit suicide. 1 in 3. So all addiction is far as I consider addiction slow suicide. Okay, typically slow suicide. At what point? I mean, I think if you're seeing a teenager engaging in a hazardous behavior for a period that I would say for each arbitrarily decide what that period would be, I would say 6 months, then you should definitely probably go to an acute intervention of some kind, whether it's ambulatory intensive or whether it's rehab. There are very, very few rehab facilities in Israel. They almost don't exist at all. So it's not like the service infrastructure here is very limited. Yes. Yes, except what does that mean? So they have to be detox. Okay, now you have to know that all people who suffer from substance use have to be detox. But once they've gone through detox, only lasts between 3 days to 3 weeks. Once you go through detox, you don't start doing it. So really the big component is the psychological addiction. Okay, not the chemical one. The chemical one is washed out of the system very quickly. Okay? Now what happens to those babies that you're talking about? They have a much lower risk. They become adults later in their life. Okay? Because that's one of the early experiences they will have. But they're not suffering from addiction as we understand it. They're suffering from chemical dependency. Very hard. So the data doesn't show that other cities are at high risk at all. I think a lot of it has to do about the structure of the family, the dynamics of the family. So, years ago, I was asked to house the son of a very big Rosh Hashiva. So he used to come to us for every Shabbos. He suffered from addiction, and he went off the dirt. And a few years after, he stayed with us for about 2 years. And I didn't hear from him for a while, and then I saw him, and he was all cleaned up. And I said, how did you do it? And I said, I would like to say that it's us, but I know that it's not, so how did you do it? And he told me a fascinating thing. So he came to us on Shabbos, but during the week, I didn't really know where he was. So he told me mainstream. So, I take a lot of hope out of this story. And I don't know if there's no one size fits all. I think one has to make their own assessments about the family structure and about the risk level of the kids and about the marital harmony and child bias and whether you can negotiate this in the family. No straight answer on this. Definitely has to be assessed. Yes. Sure. So, the treatment for most addictions is, the basics of it is very much the same. Of course it's not. There are nuances that, cases of alcoholism will not be treated with. But it's more or less the same. It very much depends on what age we're speaking about. Okay, so often one has to say about the kind of the bind from the adolescent. We've had adolescents who agree, for example, to surrender the phone for a period of 3 months. If that was the digital detox, we didn't have any access to doing it. But not all adolescents agree to do it. I do want to say that 92% of all people who go through treatment, if they go back to that behavior, they completely relapse. So only 8% of people that suffer from addiction can actually go back to the behavior that they did and do it responsibly. 8% is a very low number. So when somebody who's suffering from addiction says to me, I would like to drink again, I'm thinking, great, but explain to me why you think you're part of that 8%. Okay, it's only 8%. Only 8% can go back. Yes. 92% of people, if they revert to their behavior, will relapse. Very high percentage. Yes. I think the two have to come together. One first has to understand what is going on with adolescent. Is he socially isolated? Is he depressed? Is he anxious? Does he not have a sense of agency? Do we have low kind of self-esteem issues? Does he not have the skills to make an assessment about long-term gain versus immediate satisfaction? One has to try to figure out, and also, what does it do in his spare time? I'll give you an example. Iceland had a huge problem of adolescent alcoholism. Huge problem. Iceland is a small country, only 380,000 people, so I'm going to be really cautious about the conclusions that I make, but it was a fascinating example. So 57% of Iceland adolescents were drinking on almost a daily basis, 57%. And it was a national emergency. So they had to start doing something. And what did they do? They started mandating all the adolescent boys to go for soccer. They were mandated to go to play soccer. The country set up all these huge soccer fields all across the country, and they mandated them to go. Iceland became one of the best soccer players in the world as a world. I kid you not. And what happened is that adolescent drinking dropped to 7%. Okay, now what does that show us? That, again, this support system, kind of this camaraderie, etc., this adaptive behaviors can play a huge role here. Yes. So I kid you not, we are now doing a pilot in Bat Yam. We're now doing a pilot in Bat Yam with the municipality, or basically we're modeling the Islamic model, 3 even tell whether we're successful or not. We're starting it. We're starting it now. Mental health markers went through the roof for adolescents during COVID. Two in particular, eating disorders were up by 55%, and suicidality was up by almost 40%. Okay, adolescent suicidality, which I think you're speaking about next time. Yeah. But all the markers went up. Depression, anxiety, etc. We actually saw the substance use went down. Not for that made sense because kids were at home, right? But we saw that in the screen use, again, fell through the roof. I do want to say something about something that we're seeing. About this is part of the problem. If you're thinking about what's happening in today's world, it took approximately 46 years for the first quarter of the American population to receive electricity. 46 years. It took approximately 35 years for the first quarter of the American population to receive a phone line. The world has seen many technological revolutions. The Industrial Revolution, there were many. But there's none other like this current one. None other. More than 50% of the world population started using smartphones within 5 years of its introduction. Between 2007 and 2012, more than half of the world's population started using smartphones. So, it's just starting now. We'll see in the year's time, we'll see. What I'm saying is that it's a scenario that we don't even know really how to swallow in any way or how to combat, because the speed of it and the intensity of it is like no other one in history. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have today. Since 2012, where really you saw a mass penetration into Western adolescence, we've seen mental health markers. I'm not suggesting that it's any technology, but you saw almost a linear correlation between penetration of smartphone use and mental health markers going figure. So I just wanted to show because that's really what we're facing today. Because it's not considered yet a formal addiction, but there's no doubt. There's a big question, again, in the world of science. Is smartphone the platform, or is it the content that it's addicted? Meaning, are they addicted to social media? Or are they addicted to the smartphone? And if you have a social media with a news site, do you understand? Or gambling site, do you understand the difference? Oh, absolutely. The dopamine drips. Well, because it takes time for the world of science to produce enough data for it to be considered an addiction. And because it's so new. So the data is not there yet. Second, I think as a society, the whole bell curve, the whole has shifted to the right. We're all in many ways have problematic use of our phone. And then what are you going to say? That the whole society is addicted to smartphones? So what does it mean? No, but then, I agree. But but then we start having to differentiate. So how do we define what a smartphone addiction is? And perhaps we have some clues. They ask 25,000 American teenagers how many times they use their phone per hour. What would you think the average answer is? I don't know. The phone is between 2 and 3. 2 or 3 times per hour. But then I actually looked at how many times they look at the phone, and the real answer was between 20 and 30 times. The extreme cases were more than 80 times per hour. Okay, and it could be that those are the people who are suffering from addiction. Except it's all in its infancy. Okay, and it will take some time. Some dopamine drops, but that's not the scary part about smartphones. If you really want to know about a study, Harvard and MIT, once every 3 years, they do a joint study and they try to look at the social problems and look at from a neurobiological perspective. About a year and a half ago, they decided to ask 25,000 teenagers whether they prefer face-to-face communication or digital communication. You won't be surprised to hear that more than 80% said they prefer digital communication. And then they took the study More than 80% said they prefer digital communication to face-to-face. But then they took a step forward. They called back 2,500 of these adolescents with their parents. And they took 7,100 people and they put them inside an fMRI machine. Unbelievable sample. 7,100 people. Now, everybody knows what an MRI machine is? Yeah, fMRI is a type of what's called functional MRI. It looks at, it's a certain type of MRI. There are many things you can do in an MRI. And they look at the activation of mirror neurons. What is a mirror neuron? A mirror neuron is a dedicated neuron is the brain cell. That's the name of the brain cell. A mirror neuron is, for example, when I put my arm up, I have a dedicated mirror neuron that tells me that I put my arm up. But the fascinating thing is that you also have a dedicated mirror neuron that tells you that I put my arm up. And why? Because when you're a baby, you saw somebody putting their arm up. That's how this mirror neuron was created. So they looked at activation of mirror neurons. Now, the brain is a system, but you still have localized regions in the brain that regulate certain behaviors or emotions. And they wanted to see the difference between the parents and the adolescent children. Couldn't find any difference. Except in one thing. There was 40% less activation in the region of the brain that regulates empathy. 30% less. And it makes so much sense. By the adolescents, of course. It makes so much sense, because how is empathy constructed? When I look at you and I see whether you're engaged, or whether you're bored, or whether you're angry. And emojis and WhatsApp don't do that. And that's a very, very scary finding, because what does it mean about humans? Absolutely. I don't distinguish between hard work and gambling or pornography. I think pornography is crack cocaine. I think gambling is crack cocaine. Okay, it provides the same, I mean, if you look at a brain of somebody else, it's the same. We can't distinguish between the two. So the impact on us is no different whatsoever. Okay, people suffer from addiction, look at all those type of beers is up to into their life. Okay, their life is meaningless. Some of them prefer to end it without it. Yes, it's easy, easily said and very hard to do. Yes. What you're saying is so true, but it's not just COVID related. I mean, I think it's a global trend in the Western world altogether. There's a phenomenon called bowling alone. Very famous professor from Harvard called Robert Putnam. He was a bowler when he was young, a professional bowler, and he used to be a member of a team. And he noticed as from a very young age, he used to go to bowling alleys, and he noticed as he was becoming older and older, there were always groups of people bowling together, and he noticed how people starting to come to bowl alone. And we call this phenomenon bowling alone. But it's not restricted to bowling. We live in an age of isolation in general. Corona exacerbated this phenomenon as we don't notice it as much because we're still a community-based society, but even within our societies, the level of kind of the social fabrics and connections are nowhere near, in my own humble opinion, as strong as they were, in past generations. The most effective way to do it, in my opinion, is to get the school to do it. Is to get the schools to do it. Is to get the schools to open extracurricular activities where there is a buy-in from the parents as groups. It's very hard to do it as a single parent, where you're coming to say, well, let's do something. Yeah. And they're fulfilled, and they feel like they're a part of something, and they have a sense of identity. I do think the parents have to remember that they have a much greater level of agency than they realize. My partner lives in Pakistan, and he started a whole movement in his school to convince all the parents to switch adolescent kids to social phones. They have open smartphones, and all the kids are in a non-religious school. Yeah. So the whole parent body basically decided they're forcing their kids to, and they don't use smartphones anymore. So I'm saying parents have a lot of agency when they decide to use it. But I think, we have to motivate ourselves not to feel helpless. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's definitely, it can be done. Especially in the film community. Yes. Interesting question. I don't know there are studies about correlation of food intake and addiction. I will tell you though, the food impacts mood, to a very, very high extent. So one should definitely watch the diet just because of how you feel, and how you feel very much impacts on recovery in general, and in healing. So diet is very important. It's a very important component for everybody. I do want to talk about the 12 steps group in general. Now, the 12 steps group started in the 1940s. Alcoholics Anonymous was the first group, but today we have groups for all other types of addiction. We have NA for narcotics, we have GA for gambling, we have SA for Sexaholics Anonymous, etc. AA is how it started. We have GA for gamblers, etc. Now, the 12 steps is really a character development program. I always say that it's a wonderful program, and every person should go through it, regardless of whether they're addicted or not. There's nothing specific about 12 steps for people suffering from addiction. It's really just a character development program. I would recommend it to anybody. However, I do have quite a bit to say about those groups. The groups are not supervised clinical groups. They're open groups to anybody. Okay, now what does that mean? If David decides to go to a group, this is his first encounter with therapy. He's never been to therapy before, and it's his first encounter in therapy, and he goes to a community center where there is a group. That group may be full of help. People who are in sobriety for a long time, they're healthy, they're regulated people, but it could also be a very unhealthy group. It could be a group filled with personality disorder, with people who have not gone through sobriety. So that could be a very dangerous exercise, particularly if this is the first encounter that he's had. Okay, so that's number one. Two, they're not in any way supervised. That's the problem. People think that the person who's really out there important is not in any way a clinician. Okay? We do know that group therapy is sometimes perhaps the most effective form of treatment for addiction, but only when we're supervised. Only with a clinical group. So that's number two. Why I do think sometimes it could be good if the group is healthy is because most people suffering from addiction are very lonely. They suffer from real isolation. So these groups can provide a social fellowship that is lacking from the life. It is kind of a support group. And then the last thing is to assume that most people suffering from addiction suffer from trauma. They don't truly trauma. And again, they're not clinical. So do I send our patients to groups? Absolutely, but we know about the specific groups that we send them to. And we know that they're good groups. Okay? I hope I summarized that quickly. Any other questions? I don't know. Did I? Yes, please. In the house, possible whisper. But that doesn't mean anything. Again, it's not a divine decree. We've seen many people who grew up in chaotic homes, went through terrible, terrible abuse, and have managed to make wonderful, wonderful people of themselves. And also, intimately, professionally, but they will probably require much more work. Much more work. And if you think, then often it takes one caregiving failure. One caregiving failure to just have hope in it. Yeah. Whether it's a teacher, or a grandparent, or an uncle, just somebody who believes in it. That's the highest risk by far. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. So with a caregiver, well, we have to show them a lot of love and to make sure they get the therapy that they need. There has to be a serious clinical intervention in these type of cases, particularly children with one perspective of physical abuse. Making them feel like especially as they tend to push you away. They're hypervigilant, so the easiest way is to push anyone, but they're hypervigilant. They're always assuming that somebody's going to help them, so they push you away. And they assume months after that to put them in kind of gaining their confidence and their buying, and you're there to do and not to harm them. It could take years on that. They have to rewire all the mental representations about human beings. Yes. Group therapy actually would not recommend adolescents to ever go to those groups. Okay, scrap that, that's for adults. I think actually adolescents going to these groups can be a very destructive exercise. But that's love is not a part of the gap that you should communicate to your child. You should display it. So therapy is one, of course. So you have to identify a therapist that you think, well, first, I think geography plays an important part. I think it has to be kind of within proximity to where the child lives. How do you define it? And if you need therapist, contact me. I'll refer you. There are very few therapists that are skilled in addiction treatment in Israel. Trauma, you'll find that there are actually many therapists in Israel. Israel is well versed in trauma treatment, and there's a real depth in addiction treatment. So if you want to contact me, I'll refer you to therapists. And again, but it may be very hard to find. Positive kind of adaptive behavior and sports, this type of groups can be very useful. But therapy is where you should start. All right. So unfortunately, clinically, there's no way to treat trauma, somebody suffering from an active addiction. You first have to know the addictive symptoms, and only then you can treat trauma. You can't treat trauma when somebody is go out to do what? So I don't know what drugs is studying, and that's a particular cannabis. Okay, so that's basically a modality called harm reduction. So the psychiatrist probably saying it's better that I put him in cannabis, okay, than the alternative. And the alternative would probably to go into much harder drugs in the street. Okay. Absolutely, but it's called harm reduction. You're not in anyone, that's not abstinence model. There are two models in treatment. One is an abstinence model, where really the goal is to get somebody to stop use altogether. The other model is, well, let's look at harm reduction. What does that mean? So we should engage in things to make it less dangerous for the person who's consuming. Okay, so we prescribe them marijuana, for example. Okay, that's a form of harm reduction. You understand the difference? No, he can. He can. He won't necessarily reach the same level somebody who's managed to reach abstinence. We can definitely engage in therapy so long as he doesn't abuse it. He doesn't abuse it. He doesn't abuse what he's getting. And he doesn't take more than is prescribed. But the goal should be abstinence, always. Yes, altogether. It may take much longer, and harm reduction is definitely a way to get a person. Well, the fact that he's already going to a doctor and engaging with a doctor is a good sign. Because that's already a positive sign. And he switched to medical marijuana, it's a positive sign. But it's a journey, and it's a long journey. So you see. Yeah, but one has to know much more about the particular circumstances than me just throwing out general statements like that. Yes. No, that happened just now. Yeah. So they're now just developing the services now. I would imagine it will take 3 or 4 months before they're launched them. And it will be psychotherapeutic services and group treatment and pharmacological treatment and psychiatric treatment. However, we still have the problem of, over year-long wait lists to get into the Qipah. Okay, so that's not going to change. With all at first I need to hear much more. I can't really say that I'm hearing any of the circumstances whatsoever. If a child wants to engage in treatment, okay, assuming that the child is motivated to try to set into treatment, what is also very effective is to get the whole family in treatment. Because a lot of it has to do with dynamics within the family. Who's enabling, who's not. Working with the family altogether can be very useful as well. The problem is that the services are very scarce. So I'm sorry I'm not the very good news, but I hope that over time it will change. The change has already started. Yes. Yes. That's right. That's right. Very few of them take addiction patients. Okay, there are battalions all around Israel, not hundreds, a few dozens, but only a handful take people suffering from addiction. I hope that will change over time. I think there are just over 100 beds in those for people suffering from addiction. That's it. Very long wait list. So that's not going to be the salvation. The salvation will be when the people start feeling in trouble. Yes. Most often. Not always, but most often. The exact opposite. Yeah. It's impossible. Just think about it from a logical perspective, right? A person who's doing 10 lines a day of cocaine, right? Absolutely. Oh, yes, except that it's working the trauma. You need to have a person that can think and engage in treatment. Well, let's think about a person, for example, who just goes along to the morning wake up and does 10 lines of cocaine. 1 gram, cocaine is just divided every hour. He's ready to engage in treatment. Okay, there's nobody to talk to. They're not there. They're dissociated from reality. So you'll find that even people who gamble are in a sort of a trance. It's really a trance. People go through compulsive sexual behavior. It's not so dissimilar from being on cocaine. People that the magnitude of cocaine is much larger, but the impact is just the same. Then, marijuana has a psych. No. I mean, again, it's different on the individual and the health. By and large, you want to have right. Marijuana has a psychoactive agent. Okay? Psychoactive don't go to the work. It's part of therapy, and I don't have a psychoactive agent. So those are response to that. I don't know how to treat somebody who's high. I mean, I don't know how to do that. Is what, sorry? No. No, that's typically a product of a personality disorder. Typically, right? You find that most people who self-harm suffer from borderline personality disorder, by and large, not everybody. There's definitely a coping mechanism, but for different things. You're right, but not every coping mechanism is addiction. Yeah, it doesn't work necessarily in the same mechanism. Because it works in different factors. And the treatment for addiction doesn't work on that. That's how we can distinguish. So we can do it on a neurobiological level, but we know it's not the same mechanism. And two, because the treatment for addiction just doesn't work. We have addiction regulation, for example, DBT would have been very well. DBT is really a skill set on how to regulate yourself. So it tends to be very effective for people that suffer from DBT, from borderline problem as well. Yes. A summary. How do I do that? Okay, so let's run through this. Sure. And that's perhaps we'll end there, and then you're more than welcome to, if you need or have any questions, please email me or call me WhatsApp. Addiction is terrible disorder. So a person suffering from addiction, however, still has the choice of whether they want to help themselves. It may be a very limited choice, but it's a choice. It's a form of a disorder that requires, by and large, acute intervention. It could be anything from private, individual psychotherapy to group intervention to family intervention, and preferably all the above. It's a mix of probably genetic disposition that interacts with a very complicated environmental history. Most of the people suffering from addiction suffer from childhood trauma. All people suffering from addiction started the behavior into an adolescence. It's typically a behavior that started in and then deteriorated over time until it became a full-blown addiction. there isn't really a big difference between different types of addiction. We tend to think that lethal drugs are much more dangerous than behavioral addictions, but they're not. They're just damaging in different ways. And no. I'm saying gambling is not necessarily different to alcohol. Different types of behavioral addiction. Okay. Well, with alcohol, the next, which we say, if you remember, is gambling, problematic sexual behavior, and gaming. Okay? And the 10% of the population is in a vulnerable group that tends to be susceptible to addiction for whatever reason. We don't know who they are, so we can't pre-screen for them. But the critical thing is that we'll be good predictors. Somebody who grew up in a chaotic environment and suffered from acute trauma. So they are definitely much higher risk to develop addiction or other mental health disorders. I just want to end on a more hopeful note. Addiction is treatable. Okay, there are tragedies. There really are tragedies, unfortunately. But it is treatable. And if people decide they want to stick to treatment, many of them overcome it. It's a long journey, it's an arduous journey, but it's a journey that can definitely be worked through. And Israel has a long way to go in developing those services. So I thought we're not ending the hopeful note. But, so the hopeful note is that it's already started. The services are now started to be developed. Thank you very much.